Okay, so now we talked about trees a little bit earlier, but we're gonna dive into it a bit more. So a tree is a connected graph such that it contains no cycles. So this guy is just the most trivial tree right here. You can call it a little seed if you want. This little sapling is the most trivial graph that could be, or tree that could be considered at all interesting. And then we can go here. This is another tree. 2, 3. That's another tree. This guy right here. This is also a star. So if we have a central node and a bunch of edges coming out, or a bunch of edges coming out to other vertices that are not connected to each other, then we have that's both a star and a tree. So these guys are not mutually exclusive terms. And then if let's say, so if you guys remember those graphs we had before that we're talking about selecting the various options that we have, we were going down in descent, and that was essentially, those were essentially trees as well. And there's a bunch of stuff we can do with these guys, make it interesting. Maybe you just want to make sure that everywhere is accessible from anywhere else, but you don't want to, maybe you're not worried about making it efficient to get between these places, just to make sure they are connected. Then a tree is your best way to do that while saving on building roads. So we've got these two other equivalent definitions of a tree. So a graph G is a tree if and only if it is connected, but deleting any of its edges results in a disconnected graph. So a tree is connected, but so this is, so if you want to go this direction, so if we have a tree, so we have a connected graph such that it contains no cycles, and then we were to delete an edge, because there were no cycles, that was the only thing connecting them. It was the only, let's say, path connecting the two vertices that were connected to the bridge, that were connected to the edge. So remember, if we have a cycle, then we have two different paths linking these guys. Therefore, the subgraph containing one end one vertex, one of those vertices containing the other are now disconnected. Therefore, it satisfies the description. So now we want to prove the other direction for A here. So we're doing A right now. So now we're looking at a connected graph such that deleting any of its edges produces a disconnected graph. And we want to show that that implies that it is a tree, satisfying this definition up here. So and so we know that it's connected, and we just want to show that that is equivalent to saying that has no cycles. Or the fact that deleting any edge creates a disconnect. Tells us that there is only one path Remember, path hits each vertex at most once. One path between any two vertices. Therefore, there are no cycles. So that proves both directions of A. And now B, a graph G is a tree if and only if it contains no cycles, but adding any new edge creates a cycle. So this is going to basically be looking at the opposite direction before we assumed both of them were before we had both of them were connected, and then we were trying to play around with the definition of cycles and connectivity. But here we're going to go the opposite direction, and okay, so now let's try to prove B. So if I'm going to prove the direction that it's a graph, then it contains no cycles, but adding any edge creates a cycle. So by our definition up here, we already have that it contains no cycles. So all I have to do is prove it already has no cycles. Now I just have to prove that if I add an edge, would create a cycle. So a graph is so our graph G here is connected. Therefore, there exists a path between any 2 points. Any 2 nodes. So if I add a vertex, or if I add an edge between 2 nodes, that creates a second cycle. A second path. Therefore, it creates a cycle. Cool. Now, if I want to prove the opposite direction, I already have that it contains no cycles, but adding a new cycle creates a cycle. So here, we assume for contradiction that G is disconnected. Then I can use my new edge to connect them, not creating a cycle. Therefore, our assumption is wrong. Therefore, our assumption is wrong, and we have a connected graph with no cycles. So that shows that all those different definitions are equivalent. Going back to earlier, something to note is sometimes we will want to identify a node as our root node. And that's just going to be kind of context dependent of, you'll see like, hey, this is the source from which everything else branches out. And it can be useful to identify it as a root node. So in this case, it's this. Generally, you will draw it such that it's pretty clear which one the root node is, even though you could rearrange these to look very differently than the default is, or than we have the first time.